But what precedents are there for this, of a sitting incumbent being challenged from the left or the right by someone from his own party?
I don't know.
It's a pretty unusual thing to do.
It's pretty unusual, and it wasn't done in a tactful way. I mean, he's just out there. But that's La Follette. This is what he doesn't care if there's no precedent. It's his turn. He wants to do it. Taft's not doing a good job. He's going to do it. This is very characteristic of him.
Willing to ride roughshod over even precedent in American tradition.
Sure.
Questions? Young people first? Older people second?
I like more mature people.
Well, that begs some questions, doesn't it? Yes, questions for our presenter. Yes.
Certainly the sniping between TR and Fighting Bob are legendary. Was there ever any record of meetings between them? I'm sure that was fascinating. And then also, what was your inspiration that brought you to this passionate look at his life?
And how much do we know about their actual meetings? You mentioned a couple.
Well, their meetings are interesting. That it's clearly very strained. They're trying to get along, but La Follette is so verbose, and so he'll talk for way too long. And we know Theodore Roosevelt; he's a man of action. He doesn't like to be lectured to by this U.S. senator. So their meetings are not very smooth. And then it gets to the point where La Follette, he just can't bring himself to go meet with Roosevelt because the press says, "Oh, Senator La Follette is coming to the president." And so there's this series of telegrams that are just embarrassing. Oh, my wife is sick. Oh, I fell down. Oh, this. He's just trying to get out of these meetings. And so basically, there aren't any more meetings after that. So they don't go well. And then, and I don't imagine that Theodore Roosevelt was really very upset that La Follette kept canceling these meetings. They just didn't get along.
And how did you become a La Follette biographer?
Well, I became a La Follette biographer because back when I was in graduate school, I was casting about for a dissertation topic, and I read this little paragraph about La Follette. And he'd done all these things that I thought were really important, a lot of direct democracy measures, and I had never heard of him before. And I thought, well, this is really an interesting guy, and why have I never heard of him before? And then once I got interested in him, I thought he was, I admired what he did. But I also was very interested in how could he be such an effective senator. I mean, he really was very good, and even Roosevelt acknowledges this. Such a good senator, a great speaker, but he cannot parlay that into the presidency. So what makes, some people great senators but not good presidential candidates? And then it also brought me into that question of what do we really want in a candidate? The people in Wisconsin still, many of them still really worship La Follette because he wouldn't compromise, because he was so, straightforward and so forth. And so it's like, yes, that's admirable, but, as I say, politics is the art of compromise. So how much compromise is really what we need in a politician, and how much makes them just, lose all of their credibility and their integrity? And so for me, he's an ongoing, interesting discussion of those questions that are still important in 2012.
Other questions? Yes, here. Yeah, as an uncompromising absolutist in some things, why was he so effective as governor and senator?
Well, as governor, it was, he really was just kind of ramming his stuff through. It was governor. The legislators were not happy with him, but he had such a presence. And as Kathleen Dalton has suggested, also, there was this trend in the country. So it wasn't like he was the lone voice in the wilderness in the Senate. And a lot of people who didn't like him personally, no one ever accused him of being corrupt, and everyone always said, Bob La Follette does the work. He burns the midnight oil. When he comes to the floor of the Senate, he's got the facts. He's got the figures. He's not just a flamboyant personality. He's worked out the railroad schedules. So he was respected for that work. And so I think that even people who didn't like his personality could see that, no, he's got a good idea here, and we'll go with this. And he had his enemies in the Senate, but many people had grudging respect for him.
Other questions? Yes, here.
What do you think that if Bill would have been so uncomfortable, what do you think she could have brought to the mix? And if his total dysfunction as a father to the dysfunction of him not being able to put this all together.
And talk a little bit about his marriage and his family dynamics.
Yeah, well, it is interesting. His wife, Belle LaFollette, who I think is really much underappreciated in American history, she's this very shy woman, but she believes as he does. She's the first woman to have graduated from the University of Wisconsin Law School. She's very bright. She thinks women have great talent. And so even though she would really like Roosevelt wanted his wife wanted him to just retire, she wanted LaFollette just to be a lawyer. She doesn't like this public life, but he's in it, and so she supports him, and she writes briefs for him, and she speaks, and she does all of these things. But just as I described him in the Senate, that's how he is at home. You know, I mean, Billy be damned, he's going to do what he wants to do. So they're always in debt because he thinks that every man, woman, and child in Wisconsin should get a copy of whatever speech he's just given. So he has them printed and mailed out, and so they're always in debt, and they're having all of these problems. And at first she kind of blames herself. Maybe she's not being a good enough wife. She turns about 40, she's had about enough. And he starts this magazine in 1909, LaFollette's Magazine, and it's still in publication today as the Progressive Magazine. And so he starts it because he wants to get his message out, but then he's off running around the country giving speeches because they don't have any money. He's trying to raise money. She's left to do this thing. It's very frustrating. And then also they have 4 children. And they particularly dote on the 2 boys. And it's really a tragic story. The oldest son, LaFollette Jr., Bob LaFollette just worships this boy and really just pushes him and pushes him. There are letters when Junior is 10 years old. His father is saying, "You can do better than me, Junior. You can be president." Junior's like, "I'm 10 years old." The little tear-stained letters. But when his father dies, he's the only son old enough to take over. And so he becomes U.S. Senator, and he stays in the U.S. Senate until 1946, when he is defeated by Joe McCarthy, and is so devastated by this and ultimately is a suicide. So their other son is also pushed very heavily. So it's an interesting dynamic that, like in his political life and his personal life, he just pushes so hard for what he wants, and it's pretty reckless in a lot of ways. It does a lot of good, and it also does a lot of damage.
I'm going to ask you 2 quick more questions, but if Jeffrey Osler and Kim Porter would go up to the chairs over here on the left side of the stage, we'll go right into the discussion of the panel. There will be no break, but we'll stop just before noon. The question and the portrait you draw of him in your book is of a psychologically fragile man in some ways, and then you spoke of that famous speech in Philadelphia on February 2nd, 1912. New York Times says he's committed political suicide. It certainly put a deep hole in his viability as a candidate. What do you make of that? What really, I mean, I know he was tired, and I know his daughter was going to have surgery, but it does appear to be a little bit like self-destruction.
Well, it doesn't, never have a shot of whiskey on an empty stomach right before you go speak. This is also not a good idea. But I think it was really, it was fairly self-destructive. I mean, it was just a really obnoxious speech, and he went on for way too long, and I think that it was that he was just so frustrated. It was his turn. Things had been going his way, and now that damn Roosevelt was coming in, and I think he just lost it. I mean, he just really, you could see his frustration and outrage, and it just boiled over. Yeah.
But it's an extraordinary thing that a man of this much experience, he's been in the arena for a long time, yeah. And now he has a real shot at this. I mean, there's still a chance that he can beat back the Roosevelt insurgency. And everyone at that point, including Roosevelt, says, well, that's it. He cannot be president of the United States. He can't be the nominee of this party. It had to haunt him that this had happened.
It did haunt him. He kind of tries to downplay. Oh, it wasn't that bad. It really wasn't that bad, he says. But and I would also say, I mean, he didn't commit political suicide. He goes on. He remains in the U.S. Senate until 1925. It's not like he had to go home to Wisconsin in disgrace. But the idea that we don't want a president who, no matter how frustrated and angry, gets up and loses it in public. So yeah, it really did damage him. There's no question about it.
And as we move now down, let me ask you one last question.
Actually, before you ask me that one last question, I just want to do this one thing.
Okay.
Oops. I wanted to show you the cover of my new book. Beyond Nature's Housekeepers, American Women in Environmental History. And I want to show you that because that's my mother-in-law when she was 16 years old at ranch camp in Arizona. And I just love this picture, so I just had to show you
Wonderful.
that.
And the book is out, right?
Yes, the book is out. Hardback, paperback, Kindle. I'll read it aloud to you, however you want it. It's,
Unfortunately, we don't have it for sale here, but you can get it from your independent bookstore,
right, you can get it
or
all
any
over the
major
place.
bookstore, of course, Amazon, etc.
So that's the commercial portion of my
Okay, you
talk.
just toyed a little with the NPL. I'll be talking about that this afternoon, but that famous speech in St. Paul that did him so much damage, it almost cost him his Senate seat. What was his long-term attitude about the NPL in association with it?
Well, the thing, he said anything having to do with his opposition to World War I, he said, I have no regrets about that. And one of the things that I think is really profound is that he said, yes, the Senate tried to get rid of him. He got, Roosevelt is decrying him at every corner. But he said he got more mail about that than anything else he ever did. And it came strong. He said the support came strong from the American people. He said, I was right about that war. I was always right about that war. Those cartoons that I showed you, both those cartoonists apologized to him for that depiction. So he said, no, I have no regrets, no apologies about my position on the war.
So let's thank Nancy Unger for that wonderful lecture. Move that way now.